Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you to today's Lightspeed Wednesday webinar. Our topic today is one that I'm sure all of you have been thinking about. It's the parts physical inventory. So we'll jump right into kind of some of the webinar how-tos. And I know many of you have been on our webinars before. So anytime today throughout the webinar, there's a Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and type in questions as you think of them, and we'll be answering those as we can throughout the webinar. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll also try to address some of the questions in a live Q&A with Brian and the rest of the team. And if we don't get to everybody's questions, we'll follow up with a Q&A document that you can also access and just get this information that you need to make sure your parts physical inventory takes off as you want it to. So let's move to the next slide. And I would like to introduce one other thing we're doing today. For one of our lucky attendees, you're going to get a Lightspeed hat and also a Lightspeed Amazon gift card for $25. So at the end of today's webinar, we'll do a random drawing for one of our winners, and we'll announce that, and then we'll make sure we get your prize sent out to you. So without further ado, I want to introduce today's speaker. You guys are quite familiar with Brian, but we'll turn it over to Brian Tierney.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you everybody for joining us today to talk about physical inventory. Again, my name is Brian Tierney. I'm the Customer Development Manager here with Lightspeed. Been using Lightspeed for the better part of 30 years in various capacities. Been with the company Lightspeed for a little over 12 years in various environments, and also used Lightspeed as a dealership employee for 16 years prior to my time with the Lightspeed company. So I've been using it for a long time. Done a lot of physical inventory counts, and I've instructed folks throughout the processes in the past. And thank you for having me. Thanks for joining us today, and let's dive in. So again, today we're going to talk about the physical inventory process, some different things to think about as you're moving into a physical inventory account, or as you've been conducting routine cycle counts throughout the year, maybe some things that you hadn't thought of that we're going to offer some insight into those things as we go through our webinar today. What we're going to cover are some preparation topics and some strategies that you can apply to your physical inventory count, or some ways that you can kind of organize or make your accounts more efficient as you move towards end of year or as you apply them to your routine cycle counts. We'll look at some different ways that you can conduct a physical inventory count in Lightspeed through some of the modern technologies like barcode scanners and the mobile application, and some more tried and true processes like count sheets, reports that you can run with an old number 2 pencil and a clipboard. And then we'll even look at some ways that you can import files into the system to update your inventory in real time. We'll follow all of that up with some reporting options at the end of the import functions and the update functions, so that you can see what was impacted by your physical inventory count in terms of quantities, but also in terms of dollars, and then show you some ways that you can generate report data about inventory. Following all of that, we'll take some questions from everybody on the call. We've got some panelists standing by to answer your questions as we go through the webinar today. So don't hesitate to ask questions in the Q&A portion of the Zoom meeting if you do have questions as we go through this. But let's go ahead and jump right in. And when it comes to a physical inventory count, in my mind and in my experience, preparing for that count is going to be key. Making sure that you cross all your T's, dot all your I's before the physical inventory count is going to maximize your efficiencies and maximize your ability to be successful for that count. And some of the things that I like to think about when it comes to preparing for a physical inventory count is, one, setting a realistic time frame. How long is this going to take for you to complete? How big is your inventory? Is it a few hundred items? Is it a few thousand items? How many items are we counting? And with that said, how many people are going to be counting? Is it one person? Is it 10 people? How efficient are we going to be with the number of folks that we have counting the physical inventory? Do we do this once a year, or do we do this on a routine basis, maybe once a month, maybe once a week? Or I've even worked with dealerships that literally do a cycle count every single day of the year. So it really kind of determines your success based on time frames and based on setting some of those parameters. We want to also talk about defining the environment. Where do your parts live? Are they all in the back room? Are they all in the showroom? Are they in a warehouse? Where are the parts, and how do we define that environment? Then we also need to determine, how are we going to count? Are we going to use that old tried and true count sheets, the number 2 pencil and a clipboard, or are we going to use some modern technology like our mobile application or a barcode scanner? And another thing, this is a little bit more of a controversial subject, and a subject that I've been asked about many a time, and it kind of goes back to the history of Lightspeed. One of the things that we used to say for best practices back in the day on some of the older platforms, that was we should always set our inventory to 0 before we do a physical inventory count. And why would that be? Well, The idea of setting your inventory count to 0 basically sets you to scratch. And effectively, the only items that get put back into your inventory are the things that you physically touch or that you physically saw. And by setting inventory to 0, you're eliminating anything that would show a quantity on hand in your inventory that nobody ever physically saw or touched, and therefore don't get updated and remain in your inventory even though they physically aren't there anymore. So setting to 0 can take care of those things. Like I say, that's a best practice that lived in an older platform. If you look at some of the new documentation about physical inventory accounts in Service Connect, or if you talk to a trainer today, they probably would urge you not to set to 0. And I would say it's not right or wrong to do so, but it's something to think about, and we'll look at that as we go through the process together. So as I mentioned, preparing for the count is going to be key. That's going to maximize your efficiency, maximize your success rate when it comes to physical inventories. And one of the things that I found when I was in the dealership and preparing for a physical count is mapping out the environment, determining where the parts are. Are they all in the showroom? Are they all in the back room? Are they in a combination of places? Do we have some parts on display in the window or on the parts counter? Where is everything? And so literally getting a sketch of my environment, maybe an overhead view of the business, the building that we're in, kind of like a Google Maps view or the sketches that you see on the slide here, simply somebody just actually using a number 2 pencil and drawing it on a board gives us the ability to kind of map out the environment, to determine where parts are, and maybe even create bin locations for those parts, and then apply those bin locations to the individual parts records. And as we get into Lightspeed, you'll see what I'm talking about. What that allows us to do is really determine where the parts are, and we can organize more effectively our count. And then we can either send folks with the count sheets to those specific locations where we know the parts typically are, or we can organize our barcode scanning inventory for those folks and send them out to specific locations in the business. But preparing for the count, understanding where the parts are, and mapping out the environment is going to be key to your success. So a couple of other things to think about before we jump into Lightspeed and talk about the tools in the program are parts inventory itself. What are the key features? What are the key data points that we want to touch on when it comes to a physical inventory count? And if we look at a parts inventory record, what are the items that we need to be aware of going into it? And in my mind, there's 3 part definitions that we want to be aware of. Part number seems like a no-brainer. The on-hand count, which is going to ultimately be the count that gets impacted by the physical count, and bin location. Where are the parts in the business? Where can I find these things? And how can I organize my count using that bin location? And some other things to consider too, honorable mentions, if you will, are supplier codes and category codes. And we can use those again to help organize the process and to make us more efficient and more successful through the physical count. But let's go into Lightspeed, and we're going to talk about the physical inventory fields that we just defined on that slide. And I'm going to go to parts. I'm going to go to parts inventory. I'm going to plug in a part number, and we're going to walk around the room inside of a parts inventory record and get familiar with some things that I think are pertinent to your success in a physical inventory count. First of which, part number. Well, seems like a no-brainer to me. We need to know what the part number is on the part for a couple of reasons. One is if I'm using a count sheet to do my physical inventory counts, part number is going to be part of that count sheet. It's going to be the thing that I'm looking at when I'm trying to find the inventory and I'm updating my counts physically with my old-fashioned number 2 pencil. So part number is going to be key. On-hand count, that's the count that's going to be impacted when I do my physical update, whether it's barcode, CSV, or count sheet. That's the count number that's going to be impacted. Bin location, where are those parts? And as I'm looking at this particular part record, I've got 3 different locations, which, you know, at surface level, that's kind of strange. How could I have a part that's in 3 different places at once? Well, the reason why we have 3 different bin locations is potentially this part, which is an oil filter. Just for context, we can say that we have a box in the back room that contains all of the oil filters that we have in our inventory. Maybe not all of them. Also, I've got a display case on my parts counter that shows maybe a couple of bottles of oil, maybe some routine maintenance items, along with an oil filter that we've just got on display for the purpose of trying to upsell some of those oil filters. So the counter might be another location where that filter lives. And maybe in addition to that, I've got that same display case out on one of the front displays where I've got some other chemicals and some other supplies for my parts department. And I've got a display case that contains one of those oil filters as well. So potentially this filter could live in inventory in my store in 3 different locations, hence 3 different bin locations. So we want to be cognizant of those as we move into the physical inventory process. And again, the honorable mentions are supplier codes and category codes, and we might utilize those again to organize the counts. If I'm just counting a specific supplier today, or this week, or this month, or this year, I can define my counts by supplier. I can also define them by category, and categories would be things like chemicals, tires, clothing, that we can define our count sheets based on those category definitions. And we'll look at some count sheets in just a moment. The next thing I want to talk about is the latest and greatest version of doing a physical inventory count, which is a barcode scan. In fact, one of the things we're very proud of is we now have the ability to do a barcode scan with our Lightspeed mobile application. We'll look at that in just a moment. When it comes to a barcode scan, much like any of your big box stores like your Lowe's and your Home Depots and your Walmarts, they do their physical inventory counts with barcode scanners, much like the Motorola that you see on this slide. That MT2710, which is one of the recommended wireless barcode scanners that you can use to do a physical inventory count. And really any barcode scanner that has the capacity that's wireless, 1, and 2, has the ability to take a physical inventory count. And I would also recommend something with an LCD screen on it. That Motorola is a great example of one of those, but there's literally hundreds of different versions of the barcode scanners out there on the market that you could choose from to use for this process. If you have questions about your compatibility of your device, certainly reach out to our customer support group. The systems group can help you with any kind of barcode scan questions you have, and also help to make sure that those barcode scanners are talking properly to your Lightspeed system. Outside of the standard wireless barcode scanners, our Lightspeed mobile app, which the best part of the mobile app is it's free. Some of those barcode scanners can be $1,300, $1,600 a piece. Free sounds better to me, so why not use our Lightspeed mobile application to do a barcode scan? Most folks have a smartphone nowadays. Download that Lightspeed mobile application to your phone and use your phone as your barcode scanner. It's fast, it's accurate. I've actually used it on site at a dealership before and was shocked at how quickly I was able to complete a physical inventory count with the mobile apps. It's pretty cool. But let's take a look at what that looks like in Lightspeed. But before I really jump into the barcode scan concept, going back into Lightspeed, there's a few things. Going back to preparation and being prepared to do a barcode scan, there's some things you'll want to think about before you embark on it. One is, in the parts module, under lists, is a selection called parts labels. Now, it's true that most products nowadays, whether it's a can of Coca-Cola or an NGK spark plug, has a barcode attached to it that you could scan with your mobile application or your barcode scanner, and the scanner is going to read it. It's going to return a number. It's going to know what it is based on that number, but when you dump that data into Lightspeed, Lightspeed may not know what that number is based on what you've scanned. Hence the idea of creating parts labels. So this goes back to being prepared. And this can be a very long process. And in my experience in the dealership, when I was preparing for my first barcode scan, labeling all the parts in my inventory, it took several months for me to do that, to generate the labels and to actually apply the labels, because you're open for business and you've got other things to do rather than creating labels and sticking labels on products. And it's a very time-consuming process. So if it's something you're thinking about for the future, don't expect that you'll be able to produce the labels and stick it on everything on a Saturday and do your physical count on a Sunday. Really give yourself several months advance notice to be prepared to do this. But under parts labels, you can add all of your inventory items, or even define those inventory items by bin location, by supplier or category, like we saw in the inventory records, and produce a number of labels that exist in Lightspeed. Now, really where I'm going with this is when I go to print my labels, I can then produce a barcode version of the label, which is going to give me a barcode that Lightspeed's going to recognize. Going back to using your mobile application or your barcode scanner to scan the products, yes, it will scan any barcode, but the barcode that comes with the Lightspeed label is going to be recognized by Lightspeed. And there's a good chance that the barcode that comes from the manufacturer that's on the product may produce a number, but it may produce a number that doesn't necessarily coincide with part number. So my recommendation is put a Lightspeed barcode label on every product or every box before you do a physical count, so that you have the appropriate labels on those items before you do a physical inventory count. Now, that being said, once you've produced the labels, printed it off of your label printer, out of your laser printer, however you're printing those labels, and now you've stuck those labels onto your products, Next step is using a barcode scanner or the Lightspeed mobile application to go around and scan your inventory. Now, this is an example of the Lightspeed mobile app that you see on your screen now. Now, the mobile applications we've talked about in previous webinars works in Android or Apple devices, works on cell phones and tablets, and it affords you the ability to press the scan inventory button, walk around your showroom, walk around your sales floor, walk around anywhere where parts live in the system, scan the barcode on the part, and you can even update the quantity. If you're scanning a box and there's 10 spark plugs in that box, you can update the quantity to 10, click OK, and move on to the next. And as you're going through and scanning all your products in your store, your cell phone is saving that inventory in a cached memory where you're going to then dump that inventory information into Lightspeed in just a moment. Now, the other thing that the mobile application affords you is if you do have questions as you're going through your inventory process and you want to refer to a part number as it exists currently in the system, you can press part lookup and you can look by part number, by supplier, by description, and you can see what the system currently shows for that part. So sometimes that's a good reference if you have questions or if you're confused about what you're scanning, you can see that the part actually does exist and what those quantities are, and even last count dates for that part. But moving forward, once it's time to download inventory from the barcode scanners or from the mobile application, we're going to go into a screen under Parts and Inventory Updating called Scanned Inventory. Now, this is the interface that lives in Lightspeed that receives the data from the barcode scanners or from the mobile application to update your inventory. And I've prepared a few numbers on the screen here to offer some context into what the result would be once you've imported the information from either of the scanner tools. Across the top of the screen, you've got 4 different color-coded definitions: in inventory, in price books, multiple inventory, or not found. If the part exists in inventory, so Lightspeed knows what it is, you've got a history attached to it, it exists in your inventory file, and Lightspeed recognizes it, it's going to be lit up in white on this screen, part numbers, what the count that came from your device is, what the current count is, and it's going to show some other context and details. If the system recognizes it as being part of price books, so somehow it's in your store, somehow no one ever actually put it into Lightspeed, but the price books file, which is a data feed from your third-party companies or OEMs that feeds into Lightspeed, the number's recognized by that price feed called price books. So it's lit up in a purple color, telling you that Lightspeed knows what this is, and as soon as you hit update inventory, Lightspeed's going to put that number into your inventory. The yellow colors tell us that this part number is the same part number across multiple providers. Maybe we get this from Land and Sea, and we get it from Western Power, and we also get it from Parts Unlimited. It's the same part number from all 3 suppliers. Which supplier do you want to update? Do you want to update the Parts Unlimited or the Land and Sea one? So it gives you the option of selecting one of the suppliers related to that part. And if you see a pink or maybe a red color, if we can call it that, that's an indication that the scanner recognized it was a number. Lightspeed defined the number, but it doesn't know what it is. It doesn't show up in price books. It doesn't show up in inventory. So those red colored numbers are going to require you to go into inventory and update the categories, the descriptions, the supplier codes, and costs for those parts because Lightspeed doesn't know what that part is. Ultimately, once you've done that, you click Update Inventory. Now you've updated your physical count to match what was in your device, and you can move forward. We'll look at some adjustment reports that shows the effects of what you've just done in just a moment. Now, the other way to go about a physical inventory count is kind of our old tried and true functionality called count sheets. And count sheets doesn't require any special hardware. There's no barcode scanners, no cell phones required. Really, the only thing that's required in my mind is the old number 2 pencil, a clipboard, and a piece of paper. And then you can send a number of folks out to the different places in the business. If you've mapped out your locations using bin locations, or you've organized your counts, you can send people out to those various places in the business to use their clipboard, their number 2 pencil, and to physically count what they're seeing and tasting and touching as they go through the physical inventory count. Now, when they come back to you with their count sheets and their pieces of paper and say, Brian, here's what I've counted, go ahead and update this for me. They may or may not say that, but let's imagine they do. So go ahead and update this for me. Here's what we do in the Lightspeed world when that happens. We're going to go back into Lightspeed, and I'm going to exit this screen. I'm going to go to Parts, and I'm going to go to Inventory Updating, and I'm going to select Count Sheets. Now, what I want to do first is show you how to create a count sheet. So we're kind of backtracking a little bit based on my previous slide. We've already created the count sheets. Let's create some together. We're going to create something simple. So when I go into count sheets, I'm going to click New. I'm going to sort my criteria by part number. So my lists are organized numerically, smallest number at the top, largest at the bottom. Next, maybe I'm going to go by supplier so that all of my Malibu parts are together, all of my Forest Rivers together, all my Hondas together. And maybe third, I'm going to go by location. I'm going to also add a filter. And in my example today, we're going to use a filter for supplier. We're going to pick on Western Power here as our supplier code. And maybe I've got 2 people doing a physical count today. Sadly for me, I've just got 2 people available, but I'll take it. 2 people's better than none. So now I've got 2 count sheets, and what a count sheet is, based on this screen, if I go into the detail screen, a count sheet is a preview of the physical paper I'm about to print and hand to Brian and hand to Diana, who's going to go out into the showroom and into the back room and try to find all these parts and count them. Now, one little tip from me that I might apply, and if you look at some of the training documentation and Service Connect surrounding count sheets, I don't know that it talks about this, but one thing it does talk about is when you're updating count sheets is you've got to go line by line, and you'll notice that you've got part number, description. We've got the current counts, like in the case of the highlighted number, I've got 24 of those parts available on hand right now. And if I agree with that, I can put 24 into that field, or I can click skip. Long and the short of it is I've got to update every single line with either a 0 or an updated value, or click the skip button on the top of the screen for me to satisfy the count sheet. Now, if I've got 328 lines or 3,280 lines or 30,000 lines on a count sheet, that's a lot of data touching, right? So it takes a very long time to do that. So for me, if I was to give you a tip, offer a little bit of a suggestion, what I would say is when you come into a count sheet, click the autofill button, which is going to copy everything that's in the available column and paste it into the count field. Now you've effectively touched every single line with the one click of a button, and I don't have to go line by line and touch everything. And why is that beneficial? Because much of what's on this count sheet is going to be a 0 available quantity. Sadly, there's no way to avoid putting the 0 on hands on the count sheet. So the bulk of what's going to be on these count sheets is going to show that you have 0 on hand, and chances are you still have 0. But that's a lot of touch points that you've got to hit before you can update. So what you've done by clicking autofill is you've already touched all those touch points, and now you just go in and affect the things that need to be updated. Like this number is not 24. We actually found 23 of this one. It says we have 9 of this one. We actually found 8, and we're only going to update the things that are pertinent. Then I'm going to save. And that's going to update the count sheet. And I've got to do that for both count sheets. And sometimes I've got 5, I've got 10, I've got 20 different count sheets. So based on your criteria, based on the number of people that you've got counting, which another thing I should mention on the count sheets, both of these are unique so that you don't have the same person or that you don't have multiple people counting the same parts. Each count sheet list is unique to itself so that you're not overlapping each other. So each of the count sheets only contains unique parts. Once I've updated all the count sheets, in other words, I've got 818 and 817 lines on each of these sheets, and I've touched everything, so not entered is 0, I can then finalize. And this is a key part that I want to just highlight as we go through this. When I finalize my count sheets, it takes me into a reporting screen. And this is going to be key. And I would just want to emphasize this a little bit as we go into this. So I'm going to check all the boxes because when I run my report, I want to see everything that relates to the report I'm about to run. Before I hit update inventory, which is going to impact my inventory, it's going to take my counts from what it was to what it is, I want to run this variance report. Because if I update my inventory before I ever run this variance report, I don't have a way to go back and run this again. So you really have one shot before you update your inventory to get this report. And what's a variance report? Well, we're going to see this in just a moment. But again, I want to emphasize this. Before you hit update inventory, run this report if it's something you want to capture. If you don't care about it, no worries, just update. But if you do want this report, you've got to run this before you update. Now, my variance report, I can see it's 41 pages. And what this is showing me is what my count update has actually happened before it occurs. So it's showing me what my count was before the count and what it's about to be after the count. And it's going to show what my total variance counts along with dollar values are for my count. Now, we do have a report that's similar to this, and we'll look at this in just a moment, called our parts adjustment report. So it will give you variance in terms of dollar values, and it'll actually give you the GL accounts that were impacted by the count. But this report's one shot. I'm emphasizing that because once it's gone, it's gone. So this will give you the variance value. What cost value changed when you did your inventory report. Now, you can save this as a PDF. You can print it. You can email it to the boss. You can do whatever you want with it. But once you've run it, the next step is to hit update. And once I've hit update, then I've completed my inventory count process on the count sheets. Now, sometimes the question is, do I have to do the entire inventory before I hit update? Well, you do have to complete the count sheets before you hit update, but you can do rotating counts where I can count this bin location on a Thursday, this bin location on a Friday, this bin location on a Saturday, and update accordingly. And it will update as we go, but it's not necessary to complete all of the inventory at one shot. And if you've got multiple stores on your network, if you've got an east side store, a west side store, north and a south store, it's not necessary that everybody be on the same page and complete at the same time. You can complete your inventory as your time allows, and it will update the inventory accounts on the GL accordingly. And those can be viewed on your PL and your balance sheet accordingly, but it's not necessary to make sure that you complete everything in one shot. So that's sometimes a question that comes up. So last little detail, we'll talk about reporting in just a moment, but I want to show before we get into the reporting, the adjustment reports and the inventory evaluation reports, I want to talk about another way to do a physical inventory count, and that's with a CSV file import. Now, a lot of our companies will hire outside parties to come in and do a physical inventory count, in which case when that happens, that outside party returns to the business a report of what they counted. And we have a specific format that we require to update into the system so that you can update your physical inventory count based on what those third parties counted. Now, some businesses might actually just use Excel and walk around the shop and count their inventory on a spreadsheet and then come back to Lightspeed and take that spreadsheet and update it into Lightspeed. Well, the spreadsheets are fairly simple. A CSV file is what's required, and there's really two columns, a part number and a quantity counted. So it's very straightforward. It's a very simple spreadsheet. And just to give you an example of what that looks like, I'm going to pull one of those up now on the screen, and you can see it's a very simple couple of data sets. We've got part number and quantity. And if I have those things, that's all Lightspeed needs to update your inventory. So once I have that spreadsheet saved to my desktop or to some location on my hard drive on my computer, I can come into Lightspeed. I can come into parts, inventory updating, and I can update inventory count sheets. Oh, I'm sorry, scanned inventory, my bad. Scanned inventory, which is the same screen that we use to update the mobile application and the barcode scanner. It's the very same screen we saw a moment ago. And instead of pulling from the scanner or pulling from the mobile application, I'm going to click Upload File, find the location on my computer where that file, that CSV file lives, grab it, and hit Process File. Now, the same experience happens on the Lightspeed platform that we saw with the barcode scanners and the mobile application. I end up with a result that looks like what you see on the screen here. Part numbers that are defined as in inventory, part numbers that are defined as part of price books, part numbers that are defined with multiple suppliers, and part numbers that Lightspeed has really no idea what those are, which require some additional input from the user. Once you've managed all of those things, you click Update Inventory, and now your update has occurred and inventory is complete. So with that said, one other little detail I want to talk about, which relates to preparation. So we're kind of going backwards a little bit, but I want to talk about this because it's a question that comes up quite a bit. I probably should have prefaced this at the beginning, but I want to show you in the system, under System, Data Updating, and Parts Inventory Update. If you're the kind of business, or in your mind, it's a good idea to set your inventory to 0 before you start a physical inventory count, you can use the parts inventory update to do that. Now, one thing that I would caution you about with parts inventory updating is it's very powerful. And it's basically a blanket statement that you can define based on your parameters, whatever they are, whether it's by supplier code, by category code, by bin location, and you can define your inventory using the inventory update statement. And then you can apply a mass update to hundreds, potentially thousands of numbers with one click of a button. And the way that would look, for example, I'm looking at a series of statements, or in some cases, we might call these inventory update reports. If I select one like physical inventory set on hand count to 0, which is one that I previously prepared for this presentation, so these need to be set up ahead of time, this is what the setup screen looks like. And essentially, I have a series of columns that I can select from to develop my report, like part number, supplier code, category description, current on-hand count, on-order quantities, replacement costs, and then I've got some filter criteria and change sets. And my filter criteria says that I want to impact anything that is in inventory that shows a count that's not equal to 0. In other words, if there's a negative quantity on hand or a positive quantity on hand, I want those to be impacted. And how I want those to be impacted is my change set. And what I'm saying is I want to change the on-hand count for those parts to 0. And that's a scary prospect, because if you've got $2 million in parts inventory, as soon as I hit run, I have 0 in inventory. Yikes, imagine that. So that's something to think about. Again, it goes back to some of our old practices that we recommend as best practices. And I can remember back in the day, I know we're getting close to the top of the appointed time, so bear with me one more moment while I tell you a little bit of a story. I was in support for many years, and during end of year, which is one of our busier times in support, one of the things that used to happen back on our older platforms didn't really happen in Evo, which is the platform you're looking at now. But on our prior platforms, we urged customers to call support and have their inventory set to 0 before they did their physical count. And it was not unusual for dealers to call and sit on hold for 2 hours and wait for somebody in support to set their inventory to 0. And that was really based on some shortcomings that existed in the older platforms of Lightspeed. The shortcomings are gone, the tool's in Lightspeed, but I don't think it's necessarily required to set your inventory to 0. Are there some benefits? Yes. If we don't set our inventory to 0, how do we manage the things that we didn't touch, taste, and feel? Well, any of the updates that we did together, whether it was the count sheets, whether it was the barcode scan, whether it was the CSV file import, anytime we're updating inventory using any of those interfaces, we've set a last count date for those inventory items. So my suggestion, based on modern technology, based on modern parameters, best practices, would be to do your physical inventory count and then run a report that's going to show you all the parts that don't have a last count date of X. And that will be basically all the parts that nobody saw, tasted, or touched. And you can go back and see if those parts actually exist somewhere. Maybe they're hiding under a blanket, or they're in somebody's trunk of their car. Who knows where they are? But it gives you the opportunity to go back and find those parts if you need to. And then you don't run the risk of setting your $2 million worth of inventory to 0. And that's just scary to me, and I'm sure it's scary to some of you folks on the call today. So something to think about, but it still exists, and some dealers still do it, and it's not wrong. It's just something to think about. Now, with all of that said, if we go back into Lightspeed, and I'm going to close some of these tabs, under parts and reports, we're going to look at a parts inventory adjustment report. Whoops, parts adjustment report. And when I select parts adjustment report, I've got a series of drop downs that I can select from. And I'm going to select specifically for the purpose of our topic today, count sheet adjustments. And I'm going to drill into a supplier, Western Power Sports. Now, it could be all suppliers. It could be even based on a specific time frame. But my parameters are going to be Western Power Sports cost count sheet adjustments based on today's date. And I'm going to run the report. And this is going to show me similar information to what we saw on that variance report. So again, if you accidentally don't get that variance report, if it's something critical to your process and you forget, because that happens a lot, this report's very similar. It just doesn't give you the before and after counts. It only gives you the after counts. So we can see what general ledger account was impacted, what the total cost adjustment was impacted. We can see the context, all the individual parts that were impacted, either increased or decreased by inventory. And I can save this report to file, or I can print it if I actually want it. But this gives me the number that I can use for my adjustment moving into accounting. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Now, the last little detail when it comes to reporting is I want to talk about a parts inventory valuation report. Now, custom reports in the system, if you folks have been on some of our prior webinars, or if you're familiar with custom reports, you know that you can customize these reports any way you want to. We've got a standard report in the custom reports library and parts inventory that will really reflect what your inventory valuation is. And I'm about to show you that now. It is kind of organized by category, which may or may not make sense for your business, but I'm going to show you what that report is. And as we all know, custom reports can be massaged and updated and changed based on your specific criteria. So I just want to preface that before we jump in. But let's go back into parts, and we're going to go to custom reports, and I'm going to select parts inventory since that's the topic of today's presentation. And in doing so, I get a list of parts inventory related reports, but the one I really want to key in on today is the 504 parts inventory valuation report. I'm going to run that report. We're going to run it as a detail and run it just to get all the information from this report. And again, if this doesn't really meet your needs in your business, you can always adjust and customize this to fit your particular parameters. But what this report is going to show is what your current inventory value is. Part numbers, descriptions, supplier codes, categories, quantities on hand, and dollars associated to it. And if I go to the very bottom, I can see what my total inventory value is. So this might be a good report to just save on file, to have as a reference, to kind of produce. Sometimes folks will produce this report before the count and produce it after, just so you have a semblance of what existed before, what exists after, and you can use it as ammunition for whatever purpose you need to use it for. I think it's a best practice, but I would get this report before, get it after, or any variance of this report, and this will give you good context about your inventory and the way it's impacted through your accounts. So we've gone over a lot of different things in the parts physical inventory process, from strategies to organizing the counts. We've talked about some best practices. We've talked about the different ways that you can conduct a physical inventory count using modern technology or even an old number 2 pencil. So we hope we were able to give you some good information and provide you some ideas to think about as you're moving towards year end, or if you're considering doing cycle counts throughout the year, which in my mind, if you could do that, that's probably in your best interest. It's going to be a lot less brain damage for everybody at the end of the year. And that would be my suggestion to everybody on the call today. But thank you for your attendance. Thanks for your attention. And I appreciate everybody's time today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So much great information. And there's a lot of questions about, as we expected, parts inventory and processes. And maybe we'll just try to adjust a few of those before we kind of wrap up today. A couple of people have asked too, like if they've got a team of people out helping do their parts inventory, can they have multiple people using their phone, scanning at the same time? And even if they have like one scanner maybe in the store, can that be used at the same time? How does that all work?
It can. So as you're going around, whether it's multiple scanners or a single scanner, the data gets dumped into that scanned inventory screen that we saw. And you can continue to add to that screen throughout multiple days, multiple weeks, even multiple months. And I know I've conducted inventory processes that I had to do on my own while we were open for business. And sometimes it takes me 6 months to complete an inventory count, which sounds crazy. And how does that even happen? Well, it does. And so you can contribute that data, whether it's a barcode scanner, the mobile app, or even count sheets, to that pool of information. And then when you're ready to hit update, you update that inventory and it becomes true.
Right. And that kind of a follow-up to that too, like so said, somebody has their mobile phone and they're doing some scanning and they want to leave for lunch. Do they need to immediately import that information, or will they keep it in the cache? Kind of what's the best practice for that?
The device will hold that cache memory. I guess aside from any catastrophic incident with the device, as long as the device doesn't get run over by a truck or thrown down a flight of stairs, you'll probably be just fine. But it'll save that inventory until you're ready to download it.
That's perfect. And then I don't know, like for our panelists too, with Vaughn, John, and Rob, if there were some other general kind of questions you're seeing more consolidation of asking questions, if you guys want to jump in and maybe just position those questions too, that would be great. I'm still scanning through some of those.
Ryan, it seems like there's a number of questions around, and maybe you've answered this already, but there are a number of questions around multiple locations and just trying to coordinate those efforts within the dealership. Maybe that goes back to what Diana just asked, but is there any suggestions, best practices that you could offer there?
I guess communication's key. And I would say this in any aspect of a dealer organization, making sure that everybody's on the same page with whatever the plan is for your inventory, and coordinating it among departments, among locations and department heads is going to be key throughout that process. So if you're doing all of those things, Lightspeed doesn't really care so much if location A finishes before location B, just as long as it gets done. And all of the data that happens during the update process, whether it's location A, B, C, and D, all of that contributes to the balance sheet. And at the end of the year, if we have a goal to make sure that our inventory is done by, let's say, December 31st, as long as we meet that goal, I think that's probably my suggestion. But there's no requirements for location A to be done before B or them to be done at the same time. As long as it gets done, I think that's the key.
Great. That's perfect.
And as those are added, then, go ahead, Vaughn.
I was gonna say, hey, Dan, I noticed there were some questions on like with the mobile and then importing, like committing the mobile after you scan the inventory and then committing it. There is actually a really good document on this out in Service Connect, just on inventory count. And so, this is, Dan, I don't know if this is something you can include with,
yes,
send out, but I could send this to you afterwards, Dana. But yeah, for those that are out there, if there's more questions, you can go and look at that document as well. So
No, that's great, Vaughn. Thanks for suggesting that. And we will follow up today's webinar with the recording, the Q&A that we didn't get to, and then I'll include this document that Vaughn is referencing, as well as some others that are available in Service Connect. So that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, excellent.
I've seen a few questions on if you scan a part on one day or in a different location, when does it combine? And as long as you haven't updated the inventory screen, you keep scanning, it will count those totals.
Correct.
So you can count over several days, as Brian mentioned. You count a part in one section and maybe it's in another part of your warehouse. With it, you count those, but it will combine them on the final sheet before you commit that sheet. So you have a chance to review that and get all of your parts on one area.
Good point. Good point. So yeah, before you hit the update button, if you're continuing to contribute to that cached count field, if you've counted the same part number in multiple locations over the course of several days, once you've hit the update button, that completes the count. But as long as that cached memory is still open in the count sheet screen or the barcode scan update screen, and you're contributing to that value, it'll just update the count accordingly. And until you hit update, the count doesn't actually become true, which I think correlates to what John was saying. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, and it gives you the opportunity, the users, to look through that screen and reprint their reports and verify their count before they commit it. You know, if it says, hey, I counted 10, but it says I have 20, did we miss 10 somewhere? Or is a count really 10? So it gives you that option to bring that in.
Good point.
Yeah, I know there are still quite a few questions out there, and I know we've gone a little bit over on time. So we will follow up again, as I said, with a Q&A document from today. And again, certainly encourage you to reach out to tech support if there's very specific things you have. But I'm hoping that through the webinar today and through the Q&A, we can answer a lot of the questions that you have about just how to really manage your parts physical inventory. And then I know, Brian, you had a couple more things just on the screen too. Oh, I get to do mine. The fun thing is too, we do have our prize winner today. We've selected Chad Harrington as our winner. So Chad, I'll get a hold of you and make sure we get your prize. And just want to thank everybody again for your attendance today. We appreciate you taking time to learn more about this. Thank you, Brian, for an excellent presentation. And thanks for our panelists for helping out as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.